Hi guys! Tonight we ease gently into a winter that sits far behind us, yet somehow still feels close enough to touch. You let your breathing settle while the glow of your screen folds into the softer light of your room, and the air begins to thin the way it often does just before sleep. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. While you relax, feel free to share your location and local time in the comments, because I always love seeing where everyone drifts in from. Now dim the lights and you allow yourself to drift toward a December night. In 1377, a point in history when frost had its own personality and your modern comforts would have seemed like pure sorcery. The moment you close your eyes a little longer than usual, the colours of your room begin to deepen. Your ceiling loses its edges. The hum of your surroundings thins until the only sound you notice is your own breath. Then the cold arrives. Not the playful version that nips your nose during a short walk, but a steady pressure that grows at the ribs and settles across your shoulders. You can almost picture the medieval world waiting for you just outside the doorway of sleep. It smells of wood smoke, damp wool, and the faint trace of old straw. The air tastes sharper, cleaner, like water drawn from a stone well. A mainstream historical fact notes that the late 1300s saw the climate turn slightly cooler across northern Europe, creating winters that could be severe even for people who expected hardship. And tonight you are stepping straight into one of those winters. You move slowly, feeling as if the floor beneath you has changed from warm modern material to cold packed earth. The cold pulls at your legs, your breath leaving a pale cloud that does not quite belong in your room. Perhaps your mind is simply playing tricks with temperature, but the image feels convincing. It reminds you of those moments when you enter an old stone house on a winter night, and the chill has a deeper note, as if carried from the past. There is a quirky tidbit that some medieval households believed winter spirits could slip through cracks in the walls, so they hung sprigs of holly at doorways to confuse or delay them. As you breathe in this imagined night, you can see why such beliefs made sense. When warmth is rare, you pay attention to everything that threatens it. You walk forward, and a thin crunch appears beneath your feet. At first it sounds like powdered sugar pressed under a finger, but then you realise it is frost. You blink again, and familiar urban views fade into the narrow lanes of 14th century London. Torches flicker. Thin ice forms delicate films over puddles along the crooked street. The wooden beams above you lean at angles that feel almost accidental. You can hear a distant murmur from inside packed houses, and somewhere much farther away, a bell rings as if a church has decided it is time to remind the city that Christmas is coming. You stand still for a moment, adjusting to this new air. It feels thinner than the one you left behind, colder, and somehow more alert. You sense how people in 1377 would have lived with winter as a constant companion, not a seasonal inconvenience. Winter shaped their hours, their meals, their fears, and even their faith. Historians still argue whether the winter of that particular year ranked among the harshest of the decade, but many sources agree that the cold was persistent enough to test the patience of entire communities. You imagine that every choice from when to wake to how long to keep a fire burning held more weight than it does for you now. You begin to walk, and each breath feels more connected to the time you have slipped into. Your modern pace slows. You move with the deliberate rhythm of someone who knows the street might hide patches of ice or loose stones that roll unexpectedly underfoot. Somewhere nearby, a shutter bangs in the wind. A dog barks, then goes quiet again. You can smell not just smoke, but the sharp note of animal fat burning in lamps. The smell is not pleasant, but it is familiar for the age. The sky above you is a deep iron grey, the kind that promises snow without saying exactly when it will arrive. People in this period would have known that such a sky could mean a long night of storms, or simply more cold without relief. You feel a touch of sympathy for them as you draw your cloak tighter, even though the cloak exists only in the space between your thoughts and the story. In this moment, softness and reality blur together, letting you settle deeper into the past without any need to fight it. Further down the lane, you see two figures entering a house, their shoulders heavy with bundles of firewood. Their breath rises like steam from a kettle. The glow inside the house spills out in a thin line around the door, warm yet fragile. It reminds you that fire was life, not decoration. A single dropped ember could bring disaster, yet a fire allowed to die could mean illness, or worse. People tended flames the way you might charge your phone before bed, making sure the spark was strong enough to survive the coldest hours. As you move toward the next corner, you feel how winter shapes sound. Noise travels farther, but feels softer. Conversations blur into muffled hints. Footsteps echo against timber and stone. There is something soothing about this despite the hardship. You feel your shoulders relax, the cold settling in as a blanket rather than an intruder. Your imagination has learned to breathe the same air as the people you've come to observe, and in this strange quiet you continue forward, ready to let the deeper parts of medieval London unfold. The frost, the breath of people you have yet to meet, the slow approach of Christmas all wait for you just beyond the next turn. You drift forward along the uneven lane, letting the last traces of your own century dissolve as the cold wraps itself more confidently around your senses. The street narrows in front of you, pulled tight by tall timbered buildings whose upper floors stretch outward like tired shoulders leaning into the night. You walk carefully because the ground beneath your feet has turned slick with patches of frozen mud. Each step produces a small crunch that tells you winter is not casually visiting this place. It is running the entire show. A mainstream historical fact notes that medieval London often struggled with winter filth since waste disposal relied heavily on human labour and carts rather than any organised system. When the weather froze, the mess simply froze with it, creating slippery layers that would wait to thaw in the new year. You feel the bite of dirty snow through your imagined boots, and you notice how London at this hour seems to breathe in slow, smoky exhales. Torches sputter along house fronts, the flames pulled sideways by thin gusts that carry scents of tallow, dung, sour ale, and wood smoke. The smell is complex, not pleasant, but strangely grounding. It belongs to a world still learning how to manage the crush of its own population. You pause for a heartbeat, feeling the torchlight flicker across your face. Though you stand in the open air, the cold presses so close it is almost tangible, like a damp cloth placed over your shoulders. A cart sits abandoned near the edge of the lane, its wheels half buried in frozen slush. You run a hand along the rim, feeling the rough wood worn smooth by use. There is a quirky tidbit that some Londoners believed certain streets had personalities and that carts would break more often on lanes they considered unlucky. In a place where maintenance was unreliable, it probably helped to blame the road itself rather than the carpenter who made the cart. You continue walking, and the city reveals more of its winter voice. Somewhere ahead, a metal clasp clangs as a door closes. Somewhere behind you, a dog whines before settling again into silence. You hear your own breath, faint and rhythmic, like a soft brush against the inside of your ribs. The stillness amplifies everything, turning even small sounds into gentle reminders of life scattered throughout the cold maze. As you turn a corner, the street opens to a slightly wider space. A frozen gutter runs along one side, its icy surface holding trapped bits of straw and kitchen scraps. It reminds you that cleanliness in 1377 was not a matter of preference, but a constant negotiation with limited resources. Historians still debate whether Londoners adapted better to winter conditions than rural villagers, since the city offered occasional shelter, but also carried heavier risks of illness. You can imagine both sides seeing truth in their arguments. The city at night feels protective, yet menacing, warm in its density, yet harsh in its smells and shadows. You pull your cloak closer again, even though the cloak is only the shape of your attention. You sense how medieval residents would have wrapped themselves in wool layers that scratched at the skin but held in precious heat. You walk past a shuttered house and notice a thin line of orange glow escaping through a gap between boards. The faint sound of a cough leaks into the street. It is brief but telling. Winter makes eavesdroppers of everyone. Houses are close walls, thin voices easily shared among neighbours, whether they want them heard or not. Your attention drifts upward. The rooftops angle sharply, designed to guide rain and snow away from weaker walls. A few chimney stacks tilt precariously, as if they have been nudged by years of wind. Smoke rises in tired strands, dissolving into the dark sky. The air above London seems heavier than the air you arrived with, thickened by wood smoke and the lingering scents of mealtime fires. As you move ahead, you catch sight of a lantern swinging from a hook near a door. It glows softly, its horn panels cloudy and warm. You run your fingers lightly across the surface, surprised by its faint warmth. You imagine someone placed it there minutes before you arrived. Maybe a traveller was expected. Maybe someone hoped that a missing relative would return. Lanterns often signalled more than light. They signalled hope, safety, and the wish to be seen in a city where darkness could hide danger or misfortune. You take a slow breath, tasting the cold in your throat. It feels honest in its simplicity. There is nothing fancy about winter here. It has no interest in impressing you. It only wants to exist exactly as it is, and you're quietly learning to accept its terms. The city, harsh as it sometimes feels, becomes oddly calming when you allow yourself to walk without purpose. It lets your mind drift from detail to detail until the cold becomes another texture, not an enemy. A distant bell begins to toll. The sound is low and steady, each note carried on the wind, like a slow heartbeat. It pulls you forward instinctively. It hints that people around the city are beginning their own quiet movements toward warmth, prayer, or preparation. The churches scattered across London play key roles during winter, giving residents a symbolic refuge even when the physical warmth is modest. You walk a little faster now, guided by the bell. The street narrows again, torches fewer, shadows deeper. But now you know the rhythm of this frozen world. You know how the cold hums like a background lullaby. You know how the air thickens around corners, how the city folds and unfolds with each slow step you take. Ahead, the path bends toward a cluster of flickering lights. You see figures moving, bundled shapes pressing forward, and you sense the quiet anticipation beginning to gather across the city as Christmas approaches. And with that, you continue deeper into the night, letting the next layers of 1377 unfold at their own patient pace. You follow the slow current of foot traffic until the street turns inward, guiding you toward a cluster of homes packed tightly along a crooked bend. The buildings lean close enough that their upper floors almost touch, creating a narrow tunnel of shadow and muffled sound. You feel the air change the moment you step beneath those tilted beams. It becomes warmer, not from any fire, but from the way the wind is blocked. The cold here settles differently. It wraps around your legs while your chest senses a thin pocket of shelter. The closeness feels strangely comforting after the open street. A mainstream historical fact notes that many medieval London homes relied on wattle and daub, a mixture of clay, straw, and animal dung pressed onto woven wooden frames. These walls offered decent insulation for their time, but not enough to fully keep out winter. You approach a doorway, low enough that you duck as you enter. Inside, the scent of wood smoke hits you first. It is dense, almost sweet, and clings to your clothes instantly. The single room feels smaller than you expected. A central hearth glows in a shallow pit lined with stones, its embers pulsing like the slow heartbeat of the house. You notice how smoke curls upward, but does not commit to leaving through the hole in the roof. Instead, it hesitates, in a thin cloud under the rafters, as if debating whether to rise or stay. Historians still argue whether medieval families grew used to this smoky atmosphere, or simply endured it out of necessity. As you breathe it in, you sense how irritation would be a familiar companion for anyone living here. A woman sits near the hearth turning a spit with a small piece of meat that looks more symbolic than satisfying. The light illuminates her face in warm hues, and you can tell the fire is doing all it can to compete with the cold outside. Her movements are slow and steady. She glances at you without surprise, as though visitors slip through these walls more often than you imagine. A child sleeps close to her feet, bundled in layers of wool so thick they nearly swallow his small form. The rhythmic crackle of the fire blends with the faint whistle of wind pushing against the outer wall. You move farther into the room, and your hand brushes the rough surface of the wattle and daub. It feels cool, even this close to the fire. The surface is uneven with small bumps made by bits of straw sticking out. A quirky tidbit from building historians mentions that some families decorated the daub with pressed herbs or carved simple patterns into the surface to encourage good fortune during winter. As your fingers trace the texture, you imagine small charms, once embedded here, long since worn smooth by smoke and time. The little warmth from the fire expands unevenly across the room. One side radiates a comforting glow, while the corners fall into heavy shadow, where the cold still rules without apology. You step into those darker spaces and feel how quickly the temperature drops. Your breath becomes visible again, a pale cloud floating in the half-darkness. In these quiet corners, every crack in the wall becomes a tiny doorway for winter. The walls breathe in and out, with the wind making soft noises that resemble murmurs or whispered conversations. A pot hangs over the fire by a simple iron hook. Inside you hear liquid bubbling faintly. It is likely a thin broth, the sort that families stretched for days when ingredients ran short. The aroma rises gently toward the roof hole, mingling with smoke in thick ribbons. You close your eyes, letting the sound of the bubbling merge with the crackling logs. The room vibrates with domestic calm, despite its raw edges. You can feel how families would gather here, sharing heat with their bodies, their breath, their quiet presence. Your attention drifts toward the roof. Rafters crisscross above you, darkened by decades of smoke. Thin daylight would barely reach into the room, but tonight the sky outside is too dim to offer anything. You look up and see small gaps between the beams, where cold air sneaks through. It slides along the edges of your neck, a reminder that insulation is a luxury this home never knew. Yet the family inside seems accustomed to balancing fire with cold comfort, with discomfort. The warmth may not be perfect, but it is enough to keep the harshest danger at bay. You sit near the fire, imagining the rough stool beneath you. The heat spreads slowly across your legs, rising into your chest like a gentle tide. The fire becomes a companion rather than a tool. You understand why people tended it with such devotion. Losing the flame during a night like this would be more than an inconvenience. It could mean illness or worse. You hear the woman stir the pot again, the soft scrape of wood against iron, sending a small echo through the room. Outside, the wind pushes harder. The thin walls respond with quiet groans. You can sense the fragile line dividing safety from an exposure. Even inside, winter has a seat at the table. And yet this home radiates a sense of resilience that feels heavier than fear. People in 1377 built their comfort from scraps, routines and rituals that held their world together, while the cold pressed from all sides. The fire brightens for a moment, sending light dancing across the family's faces. You watch as the shadows sway, as if the room itself is breathing with you. Then you stand slowly, ready to return to the streets. The warmth clings to your skin for a few steps, then begins to slip away as soon as you reach the door. You step back into the night, letting the cold reclaim you. The home behind you dims again, its glow soft but stubborn, holding its ground against the great winter beyond. You move along the edge of the narrow lane, until the scent of wood smoke shifts into something richer. It carries a hint of simmering broth, warm grain, and the faint tang of yeast that signals a household preparing its evening meal. The cold still clings to your sleeves, but the idea of food draws you forward, as if your body remembers hunger the way a medieval villager would. When you reach the next door, you see a thin line of golden light escaping through the gap beneath it. You stoop to enter and step into a modest room where a family sits around a rough wooden table, their shoulders hunched against the chill that refuses to leave, even in the presence of fire. In the centre of the table rests a loaf of dense dark bread. Its crust has cracked during baking, and steam still rises from the torn edge where someone has pulled a piece away. One well-documented detail from the period is that bread consumption was astonishingly high, often forming the core of daily calories for both rich and poor. This household has shaped its loaf from coarse rye and barley, a blend that signals a year without much surplus. A pot of ale sits beside the bread, the liquid dull and cloudy, but undoubtedly welcome. You can almost taste its slightly sour edge as you imagine lifting the wooden cup to your lips. A pot of stew simmers quietly over the fire. It is thin, with more broth than substance stretching what little meat the family could spare. Carrots, onions, and perhaps a trace of cabbage float within, softened by hours of gentle heat. A lesser discussed note from medieval kitchens mentions that cooks sometimes added stale bread directly into soups to thicken them during winter shortages. You watch as the woman of the house tears a small chunk from the loaf and drops it into the pot, letting it dissolve slowly into the bubbling mixture. You settle near the hearth, feeling the warmth touch your knees, while the room behind you remains cold. The fire gives just enough comfort to keep your fingers from stiffening. Shadows sway across the table as the flame flickers. The family eats without haste, savouring each mouthful with a concentration that tells you this bowl is not only a meal, but a reassurance that the day has been survived. Some scholars continue to question whether the average winter diet in 1377 was more meagre than earlier decades, since climate changes and political tensions may have reduced harvest yields. You can sense that uncertainty reflected in the faces around the table. Their eyes linger on the pot, as if calculating how long it must last. You observe their clothing. The father wears a wool tunic patched in several places. The stitches are uneven but sturdy. A child beside him pulls at a sleeve that has begun to fray. Clothing repairs were constant, not optional during a winter this harsh. The family breathes in tandem, creating soft clouds that drift upward into the smoky air. You sense how the meal not only warms their bodies but stabilizes their spirits. In a time when every resource carried weight, even simple food could serve as an anchor. The room has no grand decorations, yet the table feels dignified in its purpose. A simple wooden salt box sits near the bread. Salt was precious, often transported from faraway coasts and guarded in small containers like this. A rarely noted practice among frugal households was to scrape residual salt from the box into soups at the end of each season, wasting nothing. You watch the woman do exactly that, tapping the box lightly so the last grains fall into the pot. Your eyes drift to a small shelf near the wall, where dried herbs hang in bundles. Their silhouettes look delicate in the dim light. Perhaps they will flavour a future stew or serve as simple remedies for winter coughs. The texture of survival here is woven from many small choices, each rooted in knowledge passed through generations. The family has learned how to make a little stretch into enough, just as countless others did across the city. As you sit there, you feel the gentle rhythm of the household wrap around you. The scrape of wooden spoons, the soft creak of the bench, the murmur of quiet conversation. Though you cannot understand every word, the tone is warm, and the cadence is slow-shaped by exhaustion and gratitude. You notice how the father pauses between bites, glancing toward the window, where the night pushes against the glassless opening, covered with oiled cloth. He seems to measure the darkness, as if assessing whether snow is gathering outside. Children sometimes received small winter treats during Christmas week, if the household could spare them. A minor curiosity, recorded in a few household accounts, notes that some families sweetened bread with bits of honeycomb or mashed dried fruit to create a festive taste. You imagine this family doing the same if fortune allowed, but tonight their joy comes from a warm stew and shared company, not extravagance. As the fire settles into a deeper glow, the room grows quieter. The family finishes their meal, wiping the last traces of broth from their bowls with small pieces of bread. You sense how this moment forms the heart of their evening. The warmth of food lingers in their chests. The smell of ale and broth drifts through the air. The children lean against their parents, already half asleep. The night outside remains cold, but the room has carved out a fragile space of comfort. You rise slowly, letting the heat slide away from your legs as you move toward the door. The family barely notices your departure. Their world is focused inward on the fire and the promise of a night spent safely together. When you step outside again, the chill meets you like an old friend, waiting patiently. You pull your cloak tighter and begin walking once more through the frozen city. You leave the warmth of the small house behind and step back into the night, where the cold greets you with immediate authority. It slides along your neck and curls beneath your clothing with the confidence of something that knows it cannot be stopped, only endured. You breathe slowly, watching the cloud of your breath rise into the dark. In this moment, you begin to understand how important every layer of clothing is in 1377. The people around you rely on wool linen and fear not as fashion but as a quiet negotiation with the elements. You pass a man walking in the opposite direction. His cloak is thick, reaching nearly to his ankles, but you can see that the fabric is patched where it has worn thin. Records from the era consistently mention that heavy wool cloaks were treasured goods repaired repeatedly rather than replaced. You glance at his boots, cracked at the toes and stiff with frozen mud. He walks with a steady rhythm, as if he has long accepted that warmth is a privilege awarded only to those who keep moving. You look down at your own imagined clothing, and the layers begin to make sense. A linen shirt closest to the skin, a wool tunic pulled over it, another layer thrown across your shoulders. Each piece scratches slightly, but the discomfort fades quickly, as you recognize how necessary the texture is for insulation. An unusual observation preserved in several personal letters describes how some villagers lined their boots with straw to trap heat during severe winters. As you walk, you feel the faint crunch of straw beneath your heel, reminding you how survival often relied on simple ideas rather than grand inventions. The wind pushes harder as you move toward the next street. It finds every small gap in your clothing, slipping into your sleeves and tugging at the hem of your cloak. You react instinctively by tightening the folds, crossing your arms briefly to preserve heat. You can almost feel the fibers drawing in and holding your body warmth. The cold seems determined, but you are learning the methods of resistance that medieval life demanded. Ahead, you notice a woman binding a length of cloth around her hands. Her fingers are red from exposure, and she works quickly, wrapping the linen in overlapping layers. Some researchers continue to question whether gloves were commonly worn among the lower classes during this period, since surviving examples are rare and expensive. Watching her improvise, you see why fabric strips often served as makeshift mittens. They allow movement while providing at least a thin barrier against the cold. The narrow street opens slightly, revealing a small workshop with its door ajar. A candle flickers inside, illuminating a tailor hunched over a piece of fabric. You step closer, curious. His hands move carefully, stitching a sleeve with quiet focus. Tools lie scattered across the table, needles, shears, and scraps of cloth in muted browns and greys. Bright dyes are reserved for the wealthy, so most garments here share the natural tones of sheep and undyed linen. A lesser-known practice among tailors involved rubbing lanolin into wool garments enhancing their resistance to moisture. As you watch him work, you can almost smell the faint, earthy scent of sheep fat lingering in the air. You move away from the workshop and continue down the lane. The cold grows sharper, hinting that snow may be near. The wind whistles through exposed rafters overhead, sounding almost musical for a moment, before fading again. A small group of children darts past you, bundled in oversized garments, clearly inherited from older siblings. Their laughter is breathy and short-shaped by the pace of their running. You notice the gaps in their clothing, the loose hems, the sleeves rolled several times, yet they keep moving as if motion alone shields them from the cold. Your attention shifts to your own hands. They feel stiff as if the air has weighed them down. You tuck them beneath your cloak, feeling the warmth return slowly. Clothing in 1377 does not promise absolute protection, but it offers enough to keep you functioning. You understand now why people layered as much as they could. Even the wealthy, with their fur-lined garments and fine woven fabrics, lacked the insulation your modern materials provide. Clothing served as armor against the long season that tried to seep into every bone. You pass under a wooden balcony where icicles hang like fragile daggers. They glimmer faintly in the torchlight, and you notice one drip forming at the tip struggling to fall. You tilt your head and feel a soft flake touch your cheek. Then another. Snow has begun to drift from the sky, slow and delicate, carrying with it a quiet hush. The city absorbs the sound, softening the world around you. The cold intensifies slightly, but the beauty of the falling snow draws your attention more than the discomfort. You pause near a low stone wall and watch as villagers hurry past. Some clutch their cloaks tightly, others pull hoods over their heads. A few simply bow forward into the wind, letting their feet decide the path. The variations in their attire reveal small differences in wealth, but everyone shares the same basic strategy. Keep the warmth close, keep the cold out, and hope the winter does not outlast the supplies. A minority of medieval specialists suggest that certain communities used heated stones placed inside cloth wraps to warm hands before attending services on particularly cold nights. You close your eyes and imagine the sensation. A gentle radiating heat nestled in your palm, fought over by fingers desperate for relief. The idea feels tender, almost affectionate, echoing how humans across history have always found small ways to ease hardship. As you open your eyes again, the snow thickens. The flakes swirl around you, catching in your hair and gathering on your cloak. The city feels softer under this white curtain. Footsteps become muted. Voices seem gentler. The cold remains, but it no longer feels harsh. It becomes part of the story, part of the rhythm, guiding you toward the next chapter of this winter world. You adjust your cloak one last time, breathe deeply, and prepare to continue onward into the frozen streets of 1377. You continue along the snowy lane until the sound of distant bells threads softly through the night air. Their tone is low and smooth, drifting over rooftops as if the entire city is exhaling at once. You pause, letting the vibration settle into your chest. It feels gentle, almost reassuring. The bells call people toward the church long before the service begins, giving everyone time to walk carefully across frozen streets and gather in slow, quiet clusters. You begin heading in the direction of the sound, following the rhythm that seems to guide the city through winter nights. The snow deepens with each step. It clings to the edges of your boots and gathers along the folds of your cloak. Houses grow larger toward the centre of town, their stone bases more visible beneath the timber frames. You feel the cold creeping into your fingertips again, but the sound of the bells urges you to keep moving. A recorded observation from clerical accounts notes that churches rang their bells earlier during winter to help citizens avoid travelling in full darkness. This early ringing also allowed people to arrive with enough time to warm themselves slightly before the service began. As you approach a bend in the road, the faint glow of lanterns appears ahead. A few figures shuffle in the same direction, their hoods pulled down low. Breath escapes their mouths in pale streaks that vanish into the night. You fall into step behind them, your pace matching theirs. The group walks with a slow certainty, familiar with every rut and stone beneath the snow. You sense how routine this ritual is for them, something woven into the rhythm of their lives. You soon reach the edge of a small square, where a stone church rises from the snow. Its sturdy walls glow with torchlight, and the windows emit a warm shimmer of candle flame. Icicles hang from the eaves, like frozen ornaments left by winter itself. You feel a pull toward the heavy wooden door, which stands slightly open to release a narrow stream of warm light. An intriguing detail found in parish documents hints at many churches kept braziers burning near their entrances during winter to help prevent frostbite among the elderly. You see one now, its embers glowing gently beneath a protective grate. Stepping inside, you're met with a rush of warmth mixed with incense. The air feels thicker, almost velvety, and carries the scent of beeswax candles burning along the walls. Rows of wooden benches stretch toward the altar, already half filled with villagers settled quietly into place. The church is not large, but its stone walls create a sense of calm solidity. You find a place to stand near a pillar, letting the flicker of candlelight soften the edges of your thoughts. Above you, the vaulted ceiling seems to echo its own presence. Shadows cling to the highest arches, where light cannot reach, forming shapes that resemble folded wings or suspended drapery. You breathe in deeply, feeling the warm air loosen the cold in your chest. The atmosphere inside is gentle, solemn, and deeply human. A few parishioners murmur softly to one another, their voices barely rising above whispers. Across the aisle, a young girl straightens her wool cloak and adjusts a wreath of winter greenery resting on her hair. Some researchers continue to examine whether such wreaths were worn widely or only among families with modest means for decoration. Watching her now, you see how it brightens her simple clothing, giving her an air of festive resilience. Her mother smooths the fabric on her shoulders with a tenderness that transcends the cold waiting outside. The candles lining the nave glow steadily, their flames bending slightly whenever the door opens. Light settles on the stone floor, revealing footprints left by earlier arrivals. The soot marks on the walls, accumulated from countless services, give the church an aged warmth. Each flicker of light seems to breathe life into the space, filling it with a sense of expectancy. You hear movement near the front of the church. A priest steps forward, adjusting the folds of his robes. His breath forms faint trails that disappear quickly in the warmer air. A lantern above the altar swings gently, sending ripples of light across his face. The congregation shifts in unison, preparing for the service to begin. A lesser-known liturgical custom involved the priest warming his hands briefly over a hidden brazier before lifting the chalice, ensuring his movements remained steady despite the cold. A soft chant rises from a group of singers positioned near the choir screen. Their voices blend into a harmonious layer that floats upward like warm mist. The melody is simple, carrying a steady cadence that feels both ancient and comforting. You can feel it vibrate gently through the floorboards, and the sensation reaches your fingertips, easing the chill lodged there. People continue to arrive, slipping quietly into empty seats. A mother guides her children toward the front, each holding a small candle. The flames tremble slightly as they walk, creating tiny halos of light around their hands. A father behind them carries a bundle of cloth wrapped tightly around a gift for the church, perhaps a small loaf of bread or preserved meat. Offerings this modest were common, allowing families to express gratitude while still protecting their winter stores. Experts remain divided on how strictly medieval parishioners observed silence before services, since some chronicles describe lively chatter while others note near complete quiet. As you listen now, the room holds a peaceful mixture. A few whispers linger, but they drift and fade naturally as more people settle into calm focus. Your gaze returns to the candles. Their light dances across the stone surfaces, revealing faint carvings worn down by time. Some shapes are recognizable, like small crosses or floral patterns. Others are abstract impressions that might once have told clearer stories. The shadows they cast stretch and contract softly, giving the room a sense of slow, gentle movement. When the priest lifts his hands to begin the service, the room falls into a serene hush. The transition is smooth and natural, and unforced, as if everyone has surrendered to the rhythm of the night. The first words spoken at the altar carry through the space, with a warm resonance wrapping around the congregation like a soft blanket. Standing here, you feel the delicate balance between cold and warmth, fear and hope, hardship and community. You sense how people in 1377 found comfort in gathering together, sharing breath and candlelight, while the winter roared quietly outside. Their faith does not appear dramatic or rigid. Instead, it feels steady and practical, a source of warmth as real as the fire in any hearth. As the chant resumes and candles flicker along the walls, you prepare to follow this gathering into the next moments of Christmas night, letting the ancient rhythms settle deeper into your thoughts. You leave the mellow glow of the church behind and slip once more into the open night. The cold feels sharper now, as if it has been waiting patiently outside the warm stone walls. Your breath drifts ahead of you in pale clouds that settle briefly before dissolving into the darkness. As you walk, you feel the subtle shift in the atmosphere. Snow muffles sound, but you can still hear distant footsteps and the soft rustle of cloaks. People are returning to their homes, or in a few rare cases heading toward the manor where the lord of these lands resides. Ahead, the street widens into a gentle slope, descending toward the edge of the settlement. Houses become larger, spaced farther apart, and the light from their windows glows with a richer hue. The subtle differences between classes begin to reveal themselves. One detail firmly supported by surviving records is that winter celebrations among wealthier households often involved larger fires, finer cuts of meat and gatherings that lasted late into the night. You sense this contrast growing with each step, the city dividing itself quietly between warmth and endurance. You soon reach a gate leading to an estate slightly removed from the crowded centre. 2 lanterns hang on either side, their light steady despite the wind. The path beyond is lined with stones placed evenly down the centre. You walk along it, hearing the faint crunch of snow beneath your boots. The manor rises at the end of the path, its shape defined by tall walls and a single tower that watches over the countryside. Smoke drifts from its chimney in thick ribbons, a sign of abundance during a season when firewood is often scarce. A servant approaches the door just as you reach the threshold. He carries a bundle of herbs wrapped in cloth, likely meant to season the dishes being prepared inside. A curious practice found in lesser-known sources hints that some households hung scented herbs above doorways during feasts to mask the smell of smoke and cooking fat. You catch a faint trace of rosemary as you pass through the doorway, feeling the warmth envelop you immediately. Inside, the contrast to the cold night is striking. A fire blazes in a stone hearth large enough to stand inside. The flames rise high, sending sparks snapping upward. Wooden beams stretch across the ceiling, darkened by years of heat, but sturdy and reassuring. Several people gather near the fire, their clothes richer than those you saw in town. The wool is cleaner, dyed in deeper colours, and trimmed with fur. You can feel the heat on your face, warming your skin more quickly than any fire you have encountered so far. A long table occupies the centre of the hall. Wooden dishes rest on its surface, each waiting for the coming feast. A sizable loaf of bread sits at one end, its crust smooth and golden. A pot simmers on a metal hook, releasing the aroma of spiced broth. Chronicles from the time make it clear that nobles enjoyed a far more varied diet than common villagers, especially during festive seasons. Tonight, the Lord's table promises a celebration that could lift the spirits of even the frostiest night. You walk farther inside, observing the torchlight reflected on polished cups and carved wooden bowls. Servants move swiftly along the edges of the hall, adjusting curtains, stoking the fire, and carrying baskets filled with stored apples and dried berries. You hear their footsteps blend with the low hum of conversation among the guests already assembled. Laughter rises, occasionally warm, an unforced reminder that even in a harsh winter privilege creates pockets of comfort. At the far end of the hall, the lord of the estate stands beside a grand chair, speaking with a steward who holds an inventory roll. Some modern historians remain unsure whether such meticulously recorded supplies were common across all estates or limited to wealthier manors. Watching the steward now, you can see how the Lord relies on him to confirm that the feast will unfold without shortage. Every item matters, from the spices measured by the handful to the furs draped over benches to protect against cold draughts. You take a seat near one of the smaller fires that line the hall. These additional braziers scatter light and warmth, preventing the interior from cooling too quickly. A group of young attendants gathers beside one of them, comparing their winter cloaks. One cloak is trimmed with rabbit fur. Another appears to have been mended several times, but still carries the pride of its owner. Clothing reveals status here just as clearly as food or furnishings. As you settle further, you begin to notice the subtle hierarchy within the room. Guests closest to the Lord occupy the warmest seats while others stand or sit near the walls. Some specialists continue to reach different conclusions about how strictly these seating rules were enforced, yet the arrangement here feels naturally understood. People move with awareness of their standing, glancing toward the Lord before adjusting their positions. You lean back slightly, letting the warmth seep into your bones. The fire crackles. The smell of roasting meat deepens. The hall fills with voices that weave into a gentle tapestry of sound. Above you, the rafters hold years of soot and stories. Shadows slip across them as the flames shift. For a moment, the entire room feels suspended in time, a pocket of light and comfort within a city wrapped in frost. But as comfortable as the hall is, you sense an unspoken truth. Outside, the cold still waits. Not everyone enjoys the luxury of this warmth. Many families in the village will share a single fire tonight, stretching their resources with quiet determination. The contrast is stark and unavoidable, forming one of the many invisible threads that bind medieval society together. You stand as the hall grows livelier, preparing to follow the night toward its next setting. The warmth lingers on your skin even as you step back toward the cooler air. Layers of class, comfort, and survival echo through your thoughts as you continue your journey through the winter of 1377. You step out of the Lord's Hall and into the open night again, carrying a last trace of its warmth on your skin. The cold wastes no time reclaiming you. It presses against your cheeks and seeps into the fabric of your cloak, reminding you that most of the world beyond those stone walls lives without luxury. You walk slowly along a wider path now, one that leads toward the outskirts, where London meets its rivers, fields, and lonely roads. The snow has settled more heavily here, muting each sound until even your footsteps feel gentle. The world expands around you. Houses thin out, replaced by stretches of open ground, where fences and bare trees stand like shadows under the moon. A soft breeze moves across the fields, brushing the snow in drifting spirals. The scent of distant water mingles with the crisp air, hinting that you are approaching a riverbank. Contemporary accounts consistently describe how the Thames shaped winter travel, sometimes freezing along its edges, while still flowing fiercely at its centre. You feel a small thrill as the landscape shifts, becoming less structured and more elemental. You follow a rutted track leading toward a bridge. The snow fills the grooves, left by carts hiding their depth, until your foot sinks unexpectedly. You adjust your balance, feeling the tug of the cold earth beneath you. A faint splash reaches your ears, the sound of dark water moving below the ice crust that forms along the edges. The river smells faintly metallic, a scent sharpened by the cold. You draw closer, watching the current push past in slow, determined waves. A curious observation from a handful of travellers notes that winter roads near the river often doubled as meeting spaces for people trading news from neighbouring villages. You imagine such exchanges here, small clusters of figures sharing information wrapped tightly in their cloaks, their voices drifting like smoke into the night. Tonight the road is quiet, with only a few distant shapes moving along the ridge. Their lanterns bob gently as they walk, offering momentary glimmers of gold in the otherwise dark landscape. You pause at the bridge, placing a hand on its wooden railing. The wood feels cold enough to sting your palm. The river moves beneath you, swirling with slow authority. A few chunks of ice drift past, knocking softly against one another. The sound is delicate, almost musical. You lean forward slightly, letting the rhythms settle into your thoughts. This place feels different from the city centre. Wider, wilder, less shaped by human hands. A small cluster of buildings stands beyond the bridge, their windows glowing faintly. You head toward them, your boots crunching through deeper snow. The ground dips and rises, unpredictably shaped by countless seasons. As you approach the clustered homes, you sense a more rural atmosphere. People here live closer to the land, relying on the rhythm of nature to guide their days. Chronicles from the period make it clear that villagers near the outskirts often balanced farming with small trade travelling to town only when necessary. Near the first house, a man pulls a sled stacked with logs. He stops to adjust the rope across his shoulder, breathing heavily. His breath steams into the night, and he nods at you before continuing his slow journey toward the door. A faint red glow escapes from inside, promising warmth that contrasts with the harsh labour needed to create it. You watch him disappear, feeling the fatigue of his steps echo through your own feet. You continue walking, letting the landscape draw you farther outward. The fields stretch into the distance, disappearing into a haze of snow and moonlight. Bare hedges line the path, their branches brittle and sharp. A few birds startle from the undergrowth as you pass, fluttering into the sky with soft wing beats. The silence that follows feels deep enough to settle into your spine. Some modern historians remain uncertain whether winter travel was more dangerous from bandits or simply from the elements themselves. Looking at the road ahead, you understand why the debate exists. The open expanse holds no walls or lanterns to guide you. If a storm fell suddenly, visibility could vanish in moments. You can feel the vulnerability as you gaze across the frozen world, understanding how people once measured travel, not by distance, but by daylight weather and good fortune. You come across a wagon abandoned at the side of the path. Snow gathers along its wooden frame, filling the bed until it resembles a shallow trough of frost. The wheels lean at an awkward angle, half swallowed by frozen mud. A few scattered footprints lead away from it toward a distant home. The story behind it is unknown to you, but the silence suggests a long wait for a thaw before anyone can move it again. Beyond this point, the sound of the river fades, replaced by a softer hum carried on the wind. It feels like the world breathing slowly, conserving its energy during the depth of winter. You continue forward, adjusting your cloak as the cold deepens. A lantern glows far ahead, marking the road's return toward the more settled parts of town. You begin walking in that direction, feeling the open countryside gradually give way to the outlines of roofs and fences once more. The shift is subtle but steady. The world becomes structured again, fields narrowing into yards, paths turning into proper roads, and distant lights clustering like constellations on Earth. As you draw closer to the city edge, the sound of human movement begins to rise once more. A dog barks. A door closes. The faint clatter of wheels on frozen ground echoes somewhere behind you. The countryside fades slowly behind your back, leaving you with an impression of vastness and vulnerability that the city cannot quite match. You step forward, ready to return to the hum of London and the preparations that fill its markets during the long nights before Christmas. You reach the city's edge again, where the countryside yields to clusters of homes that grow closer with every step. The lights ahead shimmer faintly through falling snow, and a low hum begins to rise from the market square. The sound is gentle at first, like distant stirring, then grows into a lively mixture of footsteps, voices, and the clatter of wooden stalls being opened for evening trade. You follow the noise, letting it draw you toward the heart of commerce that keeps London alive during the harshest stretch of winter. As you enter the marketplace, you notice how the snow has been trampled into uneven patches, hardened by traffic and lit by scattered torches. The flames cast long shadows across the stalls, revealing merchants bundled in thick cloaks as they arrange their goods with practiced movements. Based on well-preserved evidence from the period, winter markets remained active, even in severe cold, providing essential supplies that households could not produce on their own. You sense that same urgency here, watching buyers move quickly from stand to stand with coins tucked tightly in their gloves. A butcher sharpens his knife on a whetstone, the scraping sound cutting through the steady murmur of the crowd. Beside him hangs a small display of salted fish, its pale flesh glistening under lantern light. A woman haggles for a price, her breath forming clouds as she gestures toward a smaller piece. The butcher shrugs, lifts the fish, and wraps it in cloth with a speed that suggests he has performed this transaction countless times. You smell the faint saltiness as she walks past, clutching her purchase close to her chest. A few steps farther, you find a stall covered in bundles of herbs, dried flowers, and small pouches filled with spices. The merchant, an older man, with kind eyes, arranges his wares with delicate care. A rarely mentioned custom suggests that families often burned fragrant herbs during winter gatherings to cleanse the air inside their homes. You can imagine his customers tonight, eager to bring warmth and scent into their smoky, crowded rooms. The air around the stall carries hints of thyme and lavender, subtle but comforting. The crowd thickens as you move deeper into the square. Voices overlap, creating a gentle rhythm that feels almost musical. Children weave between adults, their boots skidding on the icy ground as they chase scraps of excitement. A young apprentice stands at a cart filled with beeswax candles, each wrapped tightly to protect it from the cold. He calls out prices, adjusting his pitch depending on the age or clothing of the buyer. Some specialists continue to study whether candle making surged during cold winters, since additional light increased productivity in homes that lacked long daylight hours. Watching the apprentice sell candle after candle, the theory feels plausible. You stop at a stall where woven baskets hang in neat rows. A woman behind the table tightens her scarf and greets you with a nod. Her hands move quickly as she demonstrates how the baskets are reinforced at the base, perfect for carrying grain or firewood. A curious detail buried in regional accounts notes that some families use smaller versions of these baskets to store embers overnight, placing them inside clay pots to preserve heat. You picture this practice, imagining a household checking the glowing coals at dawn, grateful that the fire survived another freezing night. A pair of guild members walk past their matching cloaks dusted with snow. They carry boxes of tools and small pieces of metalwork, likely intended for wealthier customers. Guilds held significant influence over market quality, ensuring that each craft met certain standards. Interpretations vary widely when scholars examine how guilds impacted social mobility, but here, their presence feels organised and reassuring. You see their emblem stitched near the shoulder, a symbol of pride and responsibility. You drift toward a baker's stall where warm bread sits in thick stacks. Steam curls from freshly baked loaves, and the air fills with a comforting aroma that draws people in like moths to a flame. The baker smiles, his cheeks flushed from standing near the oven. He hands out small samples, each one enough to give a momentary taste of warmth. When you bite into a piece, the crust crackles softly and the heat spreads across your tongue. It becomes clear why bread forms the backbone of so many winter meals. On the far side of the square, a cart displays trinkets meant for Christmas celebrations. Small wooden toys, carved figurines, and strands of greenery lie arranged with surprising care. A group of children examines them with wide eyes, whispering about which they would choose if given a single coin. The merchant laughs softly, brushing snow from the display. A handful of these objects carry a festive charm that stands out against the otherwise practical marketplace. You wander through the stalls, taking in the textures and sounds that blend into a warm hum beneath the cold. Shoppers negotiate quietly, merchants keep their hands moving to stay warm, and torches flicker against the dark sky. The entire square feels alive, driven by necessity, but softened by the shared anticipation of Christmas. When you finally reach the other end of the market, the noise begins to fade behind you. Your cloak feels heavier, with the scents and warmth you've gathered along the way. Ahead, the snow settles into a smooth blanket across a quieter street, inviting you to continue your journey toward the next corner of winter life. You leave the quieter street behind and follow the sound of laughter rising from a nearby courtyard. The noise is light and irregular, full of playful energy that feels almost out of place in the deep winter cold. As you approach, the glow of several torches reveals a small gathering of villagers forming a loose circle. Their breaths curl upward in soft spirals of steam, mixing with the falling snow. The scene has the warmth of a shared ritual, something half festive and half rebellious against the weather that presses down on them. In the centre of the circle, masked figures leap and bow, their movements exaggerated for comic effect. The masks are simple, carved from thin wood and painted in broad strokes. Some carry playful expressions, others look mischievous or odd. Archival material strongly suggests that such mumming performances were common entertainment during winter holidays, giving people a chance to blur ordinary rules through humour and costume. Watching the masked players, you sense how the cold night softens, briefly replaced by a communal spark of celebration. The performers act out small stories, chasing one another with mock weapons made of bundled sticks. Their voices rise in exaggerated tones, making the crowd laugh despite the biting temperature. One character pretends to faint dramatically onto the snow, causing children to shriek with delight. Snow clings to his cloak as he pops back up with a flourish, bowing to the delighted audience. An offbeat detail, tucked into a marginal note, reveals that some mummers believe their antics could coax good fortune for the coming year, especially if their performance drew genuine laughter. Looking at the joy around you now, you imagine such hope flourishing easily here. A group of men sets up a rough wooden goalpost at one end of the courtyard, marking a space for an impromptu winter game. Someone tosses a stuffed leather ball into the ring, and players scramble after it with loud shouts. The rules appear flexible, shaped more by enthusiasm than precision. Snow sprays under their boots as they slide and twist across the frozen ground. Early administrative notes frequently highlight how winter games offered an outlet for pent-up energy during months of limited work. You can see how important this release might be, especially for young people, eager for movement after long hours indoors. The crowd shifts to make room for the players, and you feel a gentle push at your back as more villagers arrive. Some cheer loudly, others quietly observe, each person wrapped tightly in layers of wool and fur. A dog runs in excited circles around the group, barking as if trying to join the game. The lively scene creates a bright pocket in an otherwise cold night, a reminder that even winter cannot suppress the human instinct to gather and play. As you continue watching, your attention drifts to a group of older women seated near the courtyard wall. They wrap their shawls close, but keep smiling at the spectacle before them. One woman taps her cane rhythmically on the ground, keeping time with the music played by a small group of musicians. The musicians stand near the torches, their instruments gleaming softly. A drum provides a steady beat, while a pair of flutes weave light melodies over it. Material culture studies show that simple instruments like these were often shared within communities, passed between families as treasured objects. Players collide in a tangle of snow and laughter. One slips and tumbles to the ground, drawing gasps from the crowd, before he quickly jumps back up, brushing snow from his cloak. Academic circles continue to weigh competing viewpoints regarding how rough these games could become before authorities intervened. Watching this group now, you sense a friendly competitiveness rather than true aggression. The goal is joy, not victory. The mummers return for another sketch, this time involving a mock battle between two characters wearing oversized hats. Their movements are clumsy and dramatic, creating an intentionally ridiculous scene. Children laugh so loudly that even the musicians pause for a moment, smiling at their excitement. The humour rises into the air like sparks from a fire, warming the space with its simplicity. You look around and notice how the torches illuminate faces flushed from cold and laughter. Snow continues to fall steadily, landing softly on hoods and hair. Despite the weather, no one seems eager to leave. The courtyard feels like a temporary refuge from winter's authority, a place where stories, games, and laughter fill the gaps that cold cannot reach. A whimsical fragment from folklore adds that some villagers believed laughter during the darkest nights helped guard against misfortune. Whether or not such beliefs linger here, the atmosphere suggests a shared desire to keep spirits lifted. The night grows deeper, yet the energy remains lively and warm. Eventually, the musicians shift into a slower tune, signalling the end of the festivities. The mummers bow, removing their masks to reveal smiling faces. The crowd claps politely, then begins to disperse in small groups. You watch as they head back toward their homes, their voices fading into the gentle hum of the snowy night. As the last torches dim and the courtyard grows quiet, you sense the peaceful satisfaction left in the wake of the celebration. The cold remains, but it feels less imposing now, softened by the memory of laughter echoing through the square. You wrap your cloak a little tighter and follow the path leading back toward the heart of the city, letting the warmth of the gathering linger as you continue your journey through the winter world of 1377. You follow the faint glow of lanterns toward the church again, though this time you approach from a different angle, walking slowly across a quiet stretch of snow-covered ground. The mummers' laughter still lingers faintly in your thoughts, but the world ahead grows calmer with each step. The church tower rises like a steady guardian above the rooftops, its silhouette softened by falling snow. You hear a low drone of voices from within, not lively this time, but measured and echoing. Something in the sound draws you closer, inviting you to settle into the deeper stillness of a Christmas Mass, unfolding under the weight of a long winter night. As you near the entrance, the scent of smoke and beeswax greets you before the warmth does. You place your hand on the cold stone wall, feeling its solid texture, and then step through the open door. The atmosphere inside wraps around you immediately, gentler than the cold, but heavier than the air you felt earlier. The congregation has grown since you last visited. More families have gathered, some kneeling, some seated, all waiting in a hush that feels almost sacred. Multiple independent sources confirm that Christmas services often drew large crowds, even in harsh weather, because they offered spiritual comfort, as well as a temporary break from daily hardship. You find a place near the back where you can observe without disturbing anyone. Candlelight pools along the stone floor in warm patches, creating a soft dance of shadows that rise and fall with the movement of the flames. The air carries a blend of incense, wool clothing, damp boots, and faint herbal scents carried in by parishioners. Someone near you adjusts their cloak, the fabric brushing quietly against the bench. A low whisper glides through the room as people greet one another, softly, offering brief words before settling into stillness. At the front of the church, the priest lifts a small book and begins to chant. His voice floats upward, with a tone that feels both human and distant, rising through the cold air until it meets the wooden rafters overhead. The congregation responds in murmured echoes, their breath forming pale clouds that vanish slowly in the candlelight. A peculiar habit mentioned in a solitary chronicle suggests that some worshippers warmed their hands over small hidden coals kept inside pottery cups during winter services. You glance around and notice several people cupping their palms discreetly, as if guarding tiny sources of heat. The music shifts as a choir of young singers steps forward. Their voices blend into a clear, steady harmony that softens every edge in the room. The sound fills the church, gently reaching the corners where shadows cling. You close your eyes for a moment and let the resonance settle through your chest. The peace that follows feels authentic, not forced, carried by the simplicity of the melodies. When you open your eyes again, you notice the small details that reveal the reality of winter worship. A few children sit wrapped tightly in cloaks, their noses red from the cold that still lingers even inside the church. One mother pulls her daughter close, covering her hands with a piece of spare fabric. Surviving legal documents point to the idea that many churches tried to maintain warmth with braziers near the entrances, but these efforts only soften the chill rather than eliminating it. Watching the families now, you see how they share warmth with gentle touches and careful layering. The priest steps forward once more, raising a candle that flickers brightly in the dim space. The flame reflects in the eyes of the congregation, creating a shimmering moment of communal focus. Academic researchers present differing explanations for how central light symbolism was in medieval Christmas services, but standing here, you feel its undeniable pull. The candle becomes a small anchor in the dark, embodying hope in a season defined by scarcity and cold. A soft tapping draws your attention to the far wall, where a man leans on a wooden staff. He lowers himself slowly onto a bench, breathing heavily. Snow still clings to his cloak, melting into droplets that fall quietly to the floor. A woman beside him shifts to make room, offering a reassuring nod. The kindness is small but meaningful. Winter shapes people differently, teaching them that generosity often arrives in quiet gestures rather than grand displays. The choir begins a new hymn. Its melody is slower, more reflective, rising and falling like the rhythm of sleep. The sound seems to drift beyond the walls, as if carried toward the snowy streets outside. You feel your own breath matching its pace. A whimsical fragment from folklore adds that on particularly cold nights, some believed songs sung during Mass could calm restless spirits wandering the winter world. Whether or not that belief holds merit, the hymn certainly eases the tension that is built inside your shoulders. The priest lights another row of candles along the altar, and the glow expands across the church. Shadows shrink. The stone walls appear warmer in colour. You realise that the light does more than brighten the room. It lifts the collective mood, reminding everyone of the warmth waiting in the promise of morning. The ceremony continues, with slow, deliberate movements, each step part of a sequence shaped by centuries of tradition. As the priest speaks a blessing, the congregation bows their heads. The silence that follows is deep, serene, and weighted with meaning. You let it wash over you, feeling yourself settle further into the calm that the service creates. The cold outside feels distant now, as if pushed away by the shared presence of the people gathered here. Eventually, the ritual begins to draw to a close. People rise from their benches, stretching limbs stiff from stillness. Cloaks are fastened, children gathered, whispered farewells exchanged. The air fills with the soft rustle of fabric and the muted tap of boots on stone. The candles burn steadily as the congregation begins to disperse. You remain a moment longer, letting your eyes adjust to the softer light now that fewer bodies fill the space. The church feels almost empty, but not lonely. Instead, it holds a quiet dignity, the kind that lingers after a meaningful gathering has unfolded within its walls. When you finally step outside, the crisp air rushes toward you again, but this time it feels gentler, softened by the warmth you carry from the Mass. Snow continues to fall, in fine, delicate flakes swirling around your cloak as you walk down the steps. The night is deep, but your path feels clearer now, shaped by songlight and the calm that settles over the city as Christmas approaches. You walk away from the church with a gentler rhythm in your steps, carrying the warmth of candles and choir voices through the cold night. The snow glows faintly under the moon, settling into soft layers along the road. As you move toward the centre of the city, you notice a growing brightness ahead. Torches line a wide street, their flames swaying in coordinated rows. People walk in the same direction as you, not hurried but with a quiet sense of purpose. The air feels charged, as if something grand waits just beyond your sight. Before long, you reach the edge of a large open space where a royal procession is forming. Horses stamp their hooves in the snow, their breath fogging the air in rhythmic bursts. Their coats shimmer in the torchlight, brushed carefully for the occasion. Men in fine garments stand nearby, adjusting saddles and smoothing the edges of cloaks, trimmed with costly fur. Surviving accounts from royal clerks indicate that Christmas festivities at court often involved public displays designed to reassure citizens of the crown's stability. Tonight feels like one of those moments full of ceremony and deliberate brightness. You step aside as more attendees arrive, each dressed in colours richer than those worn by ordinary townsfolk. Cloaks of deep red, blue and green ripple as they move, revealing embroidered hems and decorative clasps. A boy walks proudly near the front, carrying a polished lantern whose light casts circles on the snow. A peculiar note found in a household inventory mentions that ceremonial lanterns were sometimes filled with aromatic oils during winter events to create a subtle perfume. You catch a faint sweetness in the air and imagine this lantern carrying that scent. At the far end of the square, a grand stone building rises with quiet authority. Its windows shine with firelight, and banners hang from the upper walls. You recognise it as the Royal Hall, prepared for a feast that will draw nobles, officials, and a select few citizens. The door stands open, revealing glimpses of warm colours inside. The scene draws you closer, and soon you find yourself passing through the threshold into a world that feels almost separate from the rest of the city. Inside, the hall glows with a radiance unmatched by anything you have seen so far tonight. A massive hearth dominates one wall, its flames reaching upward with confident strength. The heat spreads across the room, filling the air with a dry, comforting warmth that loosens the tension in your shoulders. Material culture researchers point out that large halls often relied on oversized fires to heat such expansive spaces, and this one certainly follows that pattern. The scent of burning wood mingles with fragrant herbs scattered across the floor to freshen the air. Long tables run the length of the hall, already laden with dishes waiting to be served. Wooden platters hold roasted meats, glistening with spices, while bowls overflow with preserved fruits, nuts, and sweetened grains. At the centre of the main table stands a grand loaf of bread, shaped into an intricate wreath. A whimsical anecdote preserved in oral tradition claims that bread shaped in circles symbolised the unbroken cycle of fortune for noble households. Whether or not the symbolism holds true, the sight of it adds to the festive atmosphere. Guests fill the hall with a subdued but lively buzz. Their conversations weave together, rising and falling like waves in a calm sea. Laughter punctuates the flow, occasionally blending with the crackling of the fire. Near the hearth, musicians tune their instruments, plucking strings and testing flute notes that shimmer in the warm air. The sound carries easily through the hall, promising music that will add another layer of brightness to the evening. You move along the edge of the room, taking in the textures and colours that define noble gatherings. Fabrics shimmer with subtle patterns. Jewellery glints in the firelight. Even the wooden beams overhead are carved with ornate designs. Various historians present differing explanations for how intentional this visual richness was, with some arguing it served as moral encouragement for the populace, and others seeing it as simple courtly pride. Standing here, it seems both interpretations could be true. A small group gathers near the high table, where the young monarch sits. His face is calm, perhaps slightly tired, but he holds himself with careful dignity. Servants move gracefully around him, adjusting dishes, refilling cups, and attending to details that keep the scene seamless. The boy king watches the room with quiet curiosity, observing the way guests greet one another or admire the feast. His presence feels symbolic, a reminder of hope and continuity in a time when winter hardship touches every social class differently. Nearby, a minstrel begins a soft melody. The tune carries a sense of celebration, shaped by centuries of tradition, light enough to blend with the murmuring voices, but strong enough to hold the room's attention. You watch couples turn their heads, smiling at the familiar notes. Even those deep in conversation pause to listen. Music softens the edges of the hall, filling it with warmth that competes easily with the heat of the fire. Servants bring out more trays, placing roasted goose-spiced wine and glazed root vegetables on the tables. The aroma spreads quickly, settling into every corner of the hall. Guests raise their cups, offering toasts that ripple outward in a cheerful wave. The atmosphere swells into full celebration, brightened not only by food and fire, but by the sense of shared relief that Christmas has arrived despite the weight of winter. As you stand among the guests, you feel something quiet and steady beneath the surface. The hall sparkles with colour and sound, but you are aware of the world outside where most families face the cold with far fewer resources. The contrast deepens your understanding of this moment. Here winter is kept at bay through wealth and careful preparation. Beyond these walls, it presses harder. The musicians shift into a more vibrant melody, and the hall brightens again. Guests rise, some moving toward the dance floor, others choosing to remain near the warmth of the hearth. You absorb the energy as it ebbs and flows, grateful for this glimpse into the world of nobles during a season that tests every household differently. When you turn back toward the doorway, the hall's light follows you like a moving star. You step into the cold once more, carrying its warmth with you as you head back into the snowy night. You walk through the snowy streets again, letting the distant music and warmth of the royal feast linger in your thoughts. Yet as you move farther from the hall, those echoes soften, replaced by the steady hush of winter settling across London. The air grows colder, the streets narrower, and the lights dimmer. Soon you reach a part of the city where luxury fades into quiet resilience. Here the difference between comfort and hardship stretches like a thin thread pulled tight against the wind. As you approach a small cluster of houses, you notice how the glow from their windows is faint, almost reluctant. Smoke rises only lightly from the chimneys, suggesting fires meant to conserve wood rather than celebrate abundance. Evidence preserved in monastic records makes it clear that many households rationed fuel strictly during winter, choosing careful warmth over waste. Standing outside one such home, you can sense the negotiation taking place within its walls, how much heat to allow, how much to save, and how long the fire must last through the coldest hours. A narrow doorway stands open just enough for warmth to escape. You step inside quietly, finding a room filled with shadows that lean toward a small fire burning near the centre. The flames are modest, more a careful glow than a confident blaze. A family sits close, their silhouettes sharpened by the flickering light. Contemporary observers noted repeatedly that winter gatherings often clustered tightly around the hearth, not out of sentiment, but sheer necessity. As your eyes adjust, you begin to see the details that distinguish this room from the noble hall you left behind. The benches are rough, the blankets thin, and the food on the table scarce. A pot of porridge rests beside a small bowl of dried beans, both meant to stretch across the coming days. A strangely charming glimpse from period folklore suggests that some families believed stirring porridge clockwise invited good fortune, while stirring it counterclockwise risked drawing the interest of unfriendly spirits. You watch quietly as the mother stirs the pot in a careful circle, perhaps out of habit, perhaps out of hope. The father sits nearby, mending a worn boot with practiced hands. His movements are slow and calm, shaped by long winters spent repairing instead of replacing. The thread glints slightly in the firelight. Archaeological insights point toward the likelihood that many tools found in excavations belong to households that repaired the same items for years. Seeing the father work now, the reasoning becomes obvious. Winter demands resourcefulness, and every stitch becomes a decision about survival. Children huddle near their parents, wrapped in patched wool cloaks. One child holds a small wooden toy, its edges smooth from years of handling. The toy is simple, carved into the shape of a bird. A fleeting reference in a seasonal chant hints that giving simple wooden animals as winter gifts symbolized endurance during harsh times. You notice how tightly the child holds the bird, as if it carries comfort no fire can match. The fire crackles softly, but the room remains cold around its edges. You feel the chill along your back, despite leaning closer to the warmth. Winter presses through the thin walls with quiet persistence. A draught moves across the floor, shifting the straw scattered to soften the ground. A seldom remarked household quirk indicates that some families spread extra straw during the coldest nights to add a layer of insulation. The straw here looks recently arranged, its pale colour bright against the dark floorboards. The mother rises to feed the fire with a single log. She places it gently, almost reverently, because she knows it must last. Economic roles from the era demonstrate how firewood prices rose sharply during severe winters, straining already limited budgets. You watch the flames catch, slowly pulling themselves higher with effort. The family immediately leans closer, absorbing the new warmth before it dims. Outside, the wind rattles the door. The sound causes the father to pause mid-stitch. He glances toward the window, where a scrap of cloth flutters slightly. Interpretive frameworks diverge sharply when considering whether households reinforced their windows with additional cloth or left them open for ventilation. Judging by the movement of the fabric, this family has chosen a compromise between warmth and breathable air. The conversation in the room unfolds in quiet tones. The father murmurs about the weather, the mother responds with a nod, and the children listen with sleepy eyes. There is no bitterness here, only acceptance shaped by years of routine winter hardship. A playful superstition circulating among villagers proposed that speaking too loudly on winter nights might attract wandering spirits looking for lost warmth. Whether believed or not, the hush in this room feels natural, comfortable, even tender. A thin draught curls around your feet again, and you shift slightly. The father notices and reaches for another piece of cloth, draping it over a gap near the door. His gesture is small but considerate. Specialists in medieval social life propose contrasting readings of how communities cared for visitors, but here the interpretation feels simple. Hospitality often came in modest forms, shaped by whatever resources remained. As the fire settles into a steady rhythm, the family begins preparing for rest. The mother spreads blankets across a simple wooden frame, layering them with care. The children curl up close, sharing body heat. The father adds one final stitch to the boot before setting it aside, satisfied with his work. The glow from the hearth fills the room with a softness that seems borrowed from the flames themselves. You step back toward the doorway, reluctant to let the warm glow slip away. But the night calls you onward. When you step outside the family's quiet world, remains behind its light dim, yet resilient. The cold greets you again, with a steady touch reminding you how thin the line is between comfort and endurance. You wrap your cloak more tightly and continue walking through the snowy streets, aware now of how deeply winter shapes the lives of those who live closest to its edge. You move farther along the quiet street, letting the door of the small home drift closed behind you. The cold settles around your shoulders again, no longer softened by the fire's glow. The snow beneath your boots feels heavier now, as if the night itself has thickened. Ahead, the path narrows into a lane where houses shrink closer together, their roofs leaning inward, like old friends whispering in the dark. Here the mood shifts. People live with fewer layers of comfort and fewer illusions about the hardship of winter. As you walk, you pass a woman standing near a doorway, her shawl wrapped tightly around her face. She watches the street with a stillness that suggests fatigue more than curiosity. Contemporary observers noted repeatedly that poorer families often took turns keeping watch during long winter nights, guarding against thieves or wandering animals. Her silence carries the weight of vigilance shaped by necessity rather than duty. A few steps beyond her, you notice a young boy crouched near a stack of firewood. He counts the logs with deliberate care, touching each one lightly with cold fingertips. It becomes clear how little they have stored for the weeks ahead. Archaeological insights point toward the likelihood that households with limited means relied on scavenging fallen branches or repurposing broken furniture when firewood became scarce. Seeing the child now, you understand how every log carries the promise of a few more hours of warmth. You continue down the lane until you reach a wider courtyard, shared by several cramped houses. The snow is uneven here, marked by footprints that wander in all directions. A small group of people stands together near a central well, their breaths mingling in the air like pale drifting threads. Their faces are hard to read, not because of the cold, but because winter has trained them to conceal worry beneath quiet endurance. A minor but memorable observation from local tales implies that communities sometimes gathered near wells during winter evenings to trade small comforts, such as shared news or borrowed tools. The gathering here feels like such a moment, subdued but meaningful. A man leans heavily on the well's stone rim, his hands rough and reddened. His clothes hang loosely on his frame, revealing the strain of a season where food runs thin. Economic rolls from the era demonstrate how grain shortages during colder months pushed many families to stretch their meals with whatever fillers they could manage. You imagine the taste of watered-down porridge or bread made from coarse ground barley, barely enough to ease hunger, but essential for survival. You hear a quiet cough from one of the houses, then another. The sound spreads like a subtle ripple through the courtyard. The cold amplifies every noise, carrying it across the space with uncomfortable clarity. Historiographical discussions remain unsettled about how much winter sickness influenced social tensions, but here you can feel the quiet anxiety that illness brings. A mother steps outside, pulling her shawl close as she glances toward the source of the cough. Her eyes hold a mixture of concern and resignation. Farther along, you see a figure seated on a wooden stool, illuminated by the dim glow of a nearby lantern. The lantern's light reveals an elderly man, wrapped in layers that still fail to hide the shiver running through him. A seldom remarked household quirk indicates that elders were often placed closest to the hearth during winter nights, yet this man seems to prefer the cold air. Perhaps the inside of his home feels too cramped, or perhaps he simply wants a moment of quiet. His gaze follows a small group of children moving through the courtyard, their laughter subdued but still present. A faintly humorous superstition, circulating among villagers, proposed that children born near midwinter carried a natural resistance to the cold. You watch the youngsters now. Their cheeks flushed, their movements lively despite the temperature. They chase each other around snowbanks, their boots slipping as they turn sharp corners. The adults glance at them occasionally, their expressions softening for a brief moment before settling again into the stillness of winter practicality. The smell of smoke drifts from a chimney above you, but it is weak, suggesting a small fire that burns more out of duty than comfort. You can almost sense the trembling warmth inside the house, where families gather not for celebration, but for survival. The shadows behind the window feel heavy, shaped by long nights and dwindling supplies. Various historians propose contrasting readings of how winter scarcity affected community relationships, with some suggesting increased cooperation and others pointing to rising tension. Here the truth appears mixed. People stand close, yet each carries burdens too heavy to share fully. You notice a woman carrying a small basket wrapped in cloth. She walks with careful steps toward a neighbouring doorway and knocks softly. A younger girl opens the door, her face brightening slightly when she sees the basket. The woman hands it over without ceremony. Inside the basket lies a modest offering of dried beans and a scrap of salted meat. The exchange is simple, yet it radiates quiet dignity. The surviving evidence invites more than one credible interpretation regarding such gestures, charity obligation, or community survival. But watching it now, it feels like kindness shaped by recognition of shared hardship. A child tugs on your cloak as she passes her fingers, cold but curious. She looks up with wide eyes before scampering away toward a group of friends. You watch her join them as they gather around a small lantern placed in the snow. Its glow reflects on their faces, softening their expressions. They lean in close as if drawing warmth from the thin circle of light. You step back slightly, taking in the entire courtyard. The houses tilt inward, the lantern flickers, the air vibrates with quiet movement. This is not the world of noble feasts or bustling markets. It is a place where people fight winter, inch by inch, preserving hope in the smallest gestures and holding their lives together with endurance rather than abundance. As you move on, you feel a somber weight settle gently on your shoulders. The courtyard fades behind you, but the memory of its resilience remains guiding your steps deeper into the night as you follow the subtle pathways of winter life. You walk deeper into the city's quieter quarters, where the snow thickens and the streets twist in narrow arcs between leaning timbered walls. The sounds of the courtyard fade behind you, replaced by a softer rhythm of distant crackling fires and the muted shuffle of feet on packed snow. Before long, you sense another shift in atmosphere. This part of the city belongs mostly to women's work, the unseen labour that keeps households alive through the long stretch of winter. You pass a doorway where warm light flickers against the snow. Curious, you step closer and find a woman kneeling beside a low wooden bench, beating a piece of cloth with practiced movements. Despite the late hour, she works steadily, her breath visible in small bursts. Clerical household accounts consistently emphasize that textile maintenance often intensified during cold months, since clothing served not only as protection, but as one of the primary defenses against illness and frost. Watching her now, you can feel the truth of that record. Every motion she makes is precise, rhythmic, shaped by years of necessity. Further inside the home, other women move between small tasks in a narrow space illuminated by a single lantern. One tends a pot of broth resting over the fire, stirring in slow circles as if coaxing warmth from thin ingredients. Another kneels beside a child, tightening the laces of his boots. A third uses a stone mortar to crush dried herbs into powder. A minor but memorable observation from local midwives implies that certain herbs were kept ready through winter, not only for flavour, but for calming coughs and easing fever. The scent of rosemary drifts through the doorway, mingling with wood smoke. The room feels full despite its modest size, and you sense the weight of responsibility that winter places on women. Everything depends on their quiet coordination, heat, food, clothing, remedies, and comfort. Their labour blends into the rhythm of the house, the way heartbeat blends into silence essential. yet rarely noticed beyond its absence. The flicker of lantern light reveals their tired eyes, but also their resolve. You step out again, continuing along the narrow path until you hear voices from another house. A group of women stands outside, cloaks drawn tight, discussing something with low voices. One holds a bundle wrapped in cloth. Another presses her hands together as if to keep them warm. Archaeological insights point toward the likelihood that communal preparation, especially of food and medicinal supplies, was essential for winter survival in lower-income neighborhoods. You see that principle at work here, small gatherings forming to share resources and responsibilities. A strangely charming detail from seasonal folklore suggests that women sometimes place sprigs of holly in their aprons as a symbol of resilience during difficult winters. Whether true or not, you notice flashes of greenery tucked into a few garments as the women shift their weight or adjust their shawls. The bright leaves look almost defiant against the muted tones of wool and snow. You continue observing as one woman unties the cloth bundle to reveal a stack of small loaves. They look dense and rough-shaped quickly, without ornament. She hands them out without hesitation. Hunger leaves little room for ceremony. Interpretive frameworks diverge sharply when considering whether such sharing reflected formal obligation or spontaneous generosity. Standing here watching the exchange, you sense that both forces are at play. Winter encourages cooperation, even when resources are scarce. It reminds people that survival often depends on the collective more than the individual. Inside another home, you see a woman repairing a torn sleeve near the fire. Her needle flashes in the dim light, threading carefully through thick fabric. Her child sleeps close by, curled beneath blankets that look carefully layered. Each stitch carries intention, each knot an act of protection. A seldom mentioned domestic observation, found in a merchant's diary, describes how women kept torn garments hidden until evening, to avoid comments about overwork or poor fortune. The quiet night, protected by darkness, became the safest time for such tasks. You pause to listen. The room hums softly, the boil of a pot, the creak of a chair, the whisper of cloth being folded. These small sounds weave together into a melody of winter endurance. They anchor the home as much as fire or food, creating a rhythm that keeps worry from spilling into chaos. As you move on, you come across a doorway left slightly open. A young woman tends to an elderly relative sitting near the hearth. She rests a warm cloth against his forehead and murmurs comforting words. The fire behind them burns low but steady its glow, illuminating the care worn into her posture. Specialists in medieval social life propose contrasting readings of how families divided responsibilities, but here the line is clear. Warmth, comfort, and tenderness fall disproportionately upon women's shoulders. A gentle wind sweeps through the alley, carrying snowflakes that swirl around your feet. You tighten your cloak and continue along the row of houses. Through each window, you glimpse variations of the same quiet pattern: women preparing food, women mending clothing, women tending children, women keeping fires alive. The entire neighborhood seems to pulse with their efforts. Winter leans heavily on their backs, but they hold firm. A playful superstition passed between generations claimed that women who successfully kept fires burning through the longest nights earned blessings for the coming year. Whether or not that belief survives, the devotion you witness here feels nothing short of sacred. The fires flicker, the hands move steadily, and the night grows deeper. When you reach the end of the lane, you look back at the windows, glowing faintly through the snow. The light is soft, unassuming, and persistent. It reminds you that winter survival is less a story of grand gestures and more a story written in small, steady acts. You turn forward again, the path opening into another part of the city where different rhythms of nightlife unfold. The memory of the women's quiet labour travels with you, warming your thoughts as the air grows colder. You leave the narrow lanes behind and step into a quieter stretch of the city where shadows lengthen softly across the snow. Here the sounds of daily life grow thinner, voices fade into distant murmurs, and the wind carries only the faintest traces of wood smoke. Soon you reach an open square where children often gather during warmer seasons, though tonight it feels subdued. Still you hear small bursts of laughter echoing from the edges. Curiosity guides your steps toward the sound. Near a cluster of barrels turned on their sides, a group of children huddles together, each wrapped in oversized garments that trail behind them. Some wear cloaks inherited from older siblings, others have wool hats that slide over their eyes. Their cheeks glow pink from the cold, and their hands peek from frayed sleeves as they pass a small wooden ball between them. Archival tax lists provide compelling hints that many households invested what little they had into children's winter clothing, leaving adults with the older, thinner garments. Looking at the group now, you see living evidence of this pattern. One child crouches low, drawing lines in the snow to mark the boundaries of an improvised game. He explains the rules in quick, excited whispers, though you notice the rules change whenever needed to keep the game lively. Another child leans forward and nudges the ball with a gentle kick, sending it rolling through the freshly drawn boundary. A ripple of laughter spreads through the group. As they play, you notice how their movements never fully rest. Children learn quickly that stillness invites cold. They hop from foot to foot, run short distances, and sweep snow from their faces with mittenless hands. A small curiosity preserved in a border illustration suggests that winter games long ago often relied on repurposed household objects like bundled straw or carved scraps of wood. Watching these children now, you see the same resourcefulness alive in their play. Not far away, a group of apprentices gathers near a stable wall. They are older than the children, but still too young for full adult responsibilities. Their cloaks are thicker, though patched, and their boots show signs of long hours spent on hard ground. Surviving parish roles make it evident that apprentices worked throughout winter, except on feast days, yet they carved out pockets of free time whenever possible. Tonight is one of those brief intervals, and they use it to share jokes, compare tools, or toss snow in light-hearted gestures. One apprentice sits on a low step sharpening a small knife with slow practiced motions. The blade catches the moonlight as he tilts it, checking the edge with care. Materials surveys conducted by modern historians indicate that apprentices guarded their tools closely, since each item represented both livelihood and identity. The young man's focus reflects this bond. Even while relaxing, he tends to his craft. Nearby, two apprentices build a small snow structure, no taller than their knees. They shape it with the seriousness of craftsmen patting and smoothing the snow until it resembles a miniature tower. A faint echo in rural storytelling traditions claims that children who built snow towers during winter might enjoy better fortune in the coming year. Whether they know this story or not, their quiet dedication suggests an instinctive respect for shared customs. A small group of younger children continues their game, chasing the wooden ball across the square. Their laughter rings clear against the night air, echoing softly off the walls. A girl loses her footing and tumbles into the snow, but she rises with a grin, brushing frost from her sleeves. The apprentices pause to watch for a moment, their expressions briefly softening. Whatever hardships winter imposes, these moments of joy weave threads of warmth through the season. The wind picks up slightly, carrying flakes of snow across the square in shimmering waves. A nearly forgotten household belief proposes that newly fallen snow before Christmas symbolized renewal, especially for children who had faced illness or hardship during the year. You can almost imagine parents watching from their doorways, hoping the symbolism holds true. One child approaches you with shy curiosity. Her cloak is far too large, pooling around her feet, but she appears proud of it. She lifts the wooden ball toward you for a moment, as if inviting you to join. Her eyes shine with a mix of innocence and resilience. You kneel slightly and touch the ball, offering a quiet nod, and she beams before running back to her friends. A gentle commotion rises near the stable. The apprentices have noticed the return of a horse carrying bundles of straw. They rush to help the stable hand unload it, stacking the bundles neatly beside the wall. The work is quick and cooperative. The historical record remains flexible enough that experts disagree about how consistently apprentices performed such chores, but here the task feels natural, wrapped in unspoken routine. When the work is done, the apprentices resume their earlier positions. One begins telling a story, his voice rising and falling as he describes a mischievous creature said to steal shoes left too close to the hearth. A scattered fragment from field songs reveals that such stories helped pass long nights, blending humour with mild warnings. The apprentices laugh, some pretending to guard their boots more carefully. As the children's energy fades, a few begin drifting toward home. A girl waves goodnight to her friends before disappearing down a narrow alley. The apprentices eventually rise as well, brushing snow from their cloaks as they prepare to return to their masters' houses. The square grows quieter, the snow smoothing over footprints almost as soon as they are made. You stand alone for a moment, listening to the soft hush of winter settling over the space. The square feels peaceful now, touched by the echoes of play and youthful chatter. The night deepens, and you sense the city preparing for the next stage of winter's long embrace. You tighten your cloak and turn toward the next street, ready to follow the lingering traces of warmth into the unfolding night. You walk onward through the dim lanes as the night deepens, and the gentle warmth of children's laughter slowly fades into a quieter, more fragile stillness. The cold settles with renewed firmness, seeping through gaps in your gloves and brushing your cheeks with a sharp insistence. As you continue, a distant sound begins to filter through the quiet. It is not cheerful or lively. It is soft, rhythmic, and unmistakably weary. A cough, then another. Soon the echo carries along the narrow street, telling you that winter's harshness extends far beyond hunger and cold. You reach a modest home where the door hangs slightly ajar. A faint glow spills onto the snow, wavering as shadows move behind the thin wall. You step inside gently and find a woman tending to a child, wrapped in thick layers of wool. The boy's breathing is shallow, and his forehead glistens with a sheen of fever. Material surveys conducted by medical historians indicate that winter illnesses spread quickly in cramped quarters where ventilation was poor and warmth uneven. You can see the truth of that clearly here. The mother sits beside him, dipping a cloth into a small bowl of warm water. She wrings it out with trembling hands and places it on his brow. Her movements are careful, almost ceremonial. She hums under her breath, a tune that seems older than the house itself. A lightly recorded domestic belief proposes that melodies sung during illness helped soothe the spirits of the sick and encouraged steady breathing. Listening to her now, you sense that the practice carries emotional comfort as much as superstition. Across the room, an elderly man leans against the wall, wrapped in a heavy cloak. His eyes follow the child with concern, though he remains silent. The fire in the hearth burns low, offering just enough heat to keep the frost from creeping indoors. A small bundle of herbs rests on a nearby shelf. Surviving parish rolls make it evident that some families kept dried mixtures of thyme, mint, and elderflower on hand to brew into simple infusions during winter fevers. The mother now lifts a pinch of these herbs and drops them into a cup of hot water, hoping the steam will help ease the boy's breathing. A few neighbours step quietly into the room, offering assistance without words. One carries a small loaf of bread. Another brings additional firewood, setting it beside the hearth with a nod. Debates within medieval studies continue to broaden around whether such neighbourly support arose from social expectation or genuine compassion. Watching these people now, their gestures feel grounded in kindness shaped by necessity. Winter blurs the distance between families, reminding them that survival often depends on shared effort. The child shifts, giving a soft groan. His mother places a hand on his chest, whispering reassurance. The boy's face is flushed, and a damp curl of hair clings to his forehead. You notice how his small frame shivers with each breath. The fire crackles softly, and the room exudes the heavy warmth of illness and hope mingled together. A small curiosity preserved in a border illustration suggests that some families placed warm stones near the feet of sick children to keep their circulation steady during the night. You see such a stone wrapped in cloth near the foot of the child's bed, still radiating faint heat. A young girl emerges from the shadows holding a small clay cup filled with heated wine diluted with water. She hands it carefully to the mother, who nods gratefully. Material culture research indicates that wine served not only as a mild medicinal drink, but also as a means to sterilize water during periods of illness. The girl sits beside her brother, watching him with wide, anxious eyes. She does not speak, but her posture reveals her worry as clearly as any words. Outside, the wind pushes against the door, sending a faint chill across your back. The mother stands to secure the entrance with a small wooden latch. When she returns to the hearth, she stirs the fire with renewed urgency, adding a larger log than she might normally spare. Multiple unrelated chronicles corroborate the idea that families sometimes used more fuel during nights of sickness, despite scarcity, choosing warmth over prudence when health was at risk. A neighbour steps closer, carrying a cloth satchel. From it he removes a small pouch of powdered ginger and another containing dried rose hips. He explains in a low voice that these remedies came from a relative who visited the market earlier. Competing academic interpretations challenge one another regarding how widely these ingredients were used outside wealthy households. Yet seeing them here, passed among neighbours, suggests that simple medicinal ingredients sometimes found their way even into modest homes. The child begins coughing again, the sound deeper than before. His mother rubs his back gently, offering the herbal infusion in slow sips. The steam rises, fogging the air with a faint scent of mint. She watches him closely, her eyes filled with a tender mixture of fear and patience. You sense how this moment has stretched across countless winters, for countless families, each doing what they can with limited resources. You turn your gaze toward a small wooden cross hanging on the wall. Its surface has been worn smooth by years of handling. A scattered fragment from field songs reveals that families often prayed over small tokens like this during winter illnesses, believing the object helped anchor hope. The quiet faith hanging in this room feels understated yet steady. As time passes, the child's breathing softens slightly. The fever has not broken, but the warmth and care have eased his discomfort. The mother closes her eyes briefly, allowing a moment of relief to wash over her. The neighbours exchange glances silently, acknowledging that tonight is only one step in a longer fight. When you finally step outside, the cold air feels sharper after the heat of the sick room. The snow seems brighter, the night quieter. Illness does not shout in medieval winter. It whispers through rooms, rests in the spaces between breaths, and lingers in the chimneys that release pale smoke into the frozen sky. You walk forward slowly, carrying with you the weight of what you witnessed, aware now of how sickness weaves its delicate and relentless thread through the fabric of winter life. You follow the narrow street until it opens into a broader lane where the snow lies in unbroken sheets, smooth as pale linen under the moon. The air feels still, almost suspended, as if the city itself has paused to gather strength. This is the stretch of midwinter known as Christmastide, the days when ordinary routines soften and households shift into a rhythm that feels looser, slower, and threaded with quiet anticipation. Though the cold remains unyielding, something gentler hums beneath the surface. You walk along the lane and soon notice small gatherings outside several homes. Lanterns glow faintly behind oiled cloth windows, casting warm patches of light onto the snow. Families move with less urgency than usual, lingering near doorways or speaking softly across fences. Multiple unrelated chronicles corroborate accounts that Christmastide offered rare moments of reduced labour for many people, allowing even the poorest households brief intervals of rest. You can sense that gentle easing here as voices drift across the street in slow, unhurried exchanges. Near the centre of the lane, two men carry a wooden bench between them, laughing quietly as they manoeuvre it through the snow. They set it beside a door where several neighbours are already gathered. A light-hearted custom, noted in a traveller's memoir, hints that people sometimes placed benches outdoors during Christmastide, so visitors could rest or share a cup of ale without entering homes crowded with sleeping children. You watch as a woman hands each man a small clay mug filled with warm spiced drink, the steam rising into the cold air like a curling ribbon. Children begin to appear, wrapped tightly in wool cloaks. They move in clusters, some holding hands, others dragging small sledges made from scrap wood. The holiday has loosened the usual rules, giving them freedom to wander a bit farther from home. A nearly forgotten household belief proposes that children who played in fresh snow during Christmastide helped ensure good harvests. Whether or not anyone still believes this, the joy on their faces suggests the tradition has found new meaning. Inside one home, the door left slightly ajar reveals a family gathered around a small feast. The table is modest yet carefully arranged. Dried fruits rest in a wooden bowl, and a loaf of sweetened bread sits in the centre, glistening faintly in the firelight. Researchers analysing the social fabric of the time propose rival views on whether such treats were common among the lower classes or reserved mainly for wealthier households. Here the simple spread feels like a special occasion shaped by effort more than wealth. A young woman stands near a window lifting a sprig of evergreen to hang above the frame. Its deep green needles stand out vividly against the pale wood of the wall. A scattered fragment from field songs reveals that evergreens symbolised endurance through winter's darkest days. Her gesture feels both practical and symbolic, as though she is stitching a thin thread of hope into the fabric of her home. Farther down the lane, a group of men gathers around a small brazier set near a crossroads. They pass a shared jug between them, taking slow sips and exhaling with satisfaction. Their conversation carries the easy rhythm of men who for a few nights at least feel no pressure to rush back to their labour. The historical record remains flexible enough that experts disagree about how widespread these informal gatherings were. Yet watching them now, their presence feels natural, even necessary. Winter binds people together as much as it separates them. You notice a woman stepping carefully across the snow toward a neighbour's door, carrying a small basket covered with cloth. When she reaches the entrance, she lifts the cloth to reveal several flat cakes and a handful of dried berries. The neighbour accepts the offering, quietly placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. The exchange is simple, but the warmth behind it lingers in the air. The evidence leaves room for several interpretations concerning whether such gifts were acts of charity or tokens of friendly obligation. Tonight they feel like gestures of shared strength. A group of older children forms a circle near the crossroads. One begins a rhythmic chant, stamping her boots softly in time. Others join in creating a pattern that sends echoes across the snowy ground. A small curiosity preserved in a border illustration suggests that rhythmic games during Christmastide represented the turning of the year, marking the gradual return of longer daylight. The children, unaware of any symbolism, spin in their circle, their laughter forming a halo of warmth in the cold. You continue down the lane and come upon a small shed with its door ajar. Inside, 3 families have gathered, sharing warm coals taken from their hearths to start a communal fire. Sparks fly upward as the flames take hold, illuminating faces lined with fatigue and relief. Competing academic interpretations challenge one another regarding whether such communal fires served symbolic roles or purely practical ones. But as you watch the family's lean, close hands stretch toward the glow, the meaning feels clear enough. Warmth shared is warmth multiplied. The fire crackles, sending waves of heat into the still night. The snow outside continues to fall, though more lightly now, drifting in soft spirals. You stand quietly, letting the scene imprint itself on your mind, the cluster of families, the flicker of flames, the silhouettes of children dancing in the distance. Christmastide softens the sharp edges of winter, filling the nights with small rituals that nourish the spirit. When you step back into the lane, the world feels both quiet and full. The cold remains, yet something within you feels steadier, warmed by the glimpses of community and gentle celebration. You continue walking, letting the soft hum of winter carry you toward the next chapter of the frozen season. You continue along the snowy road as the city grows quieter, still approaching the threshold between the fading year and the one waiting beyond the horizon. The night deepens into a gentle blue, and the air carries a stillness that feels almost ceremonial. This is the point in winter when people begin to look both backward and forward, holding the weight of the past months in one hand and the uncertainty of the future in the other. Lanterns flicker behind shuttered windows, and the snow reflects their light in faint golden patches. You pass a group of townsfolk gathered near a small crossroads. They stand in a rough circle, speaking softly among themselves. Some cradle cups of warm ale, while others wrap their cloaks more tightly against the cold. Records left by civic clerks strongly imply that nights near the turn of the year held a special significance for communities who treated them as moments to assess what had been lost, gained and endured. Watching these figures, now you sense the gravity of their reflections. At the centre of the circle, a woman holds a small woven charm made from dried reeds. She turns it slowly in her hands before hanging it on a wooden post. A curious belief preserved in the domestic charms proposes that displaying woven reeds on the last nights of the year invited protection from misfortune and encouraged resilience in the months ahead. The charm sways gently in the wind, its shadow shifting with each flicker of torchlight. A man steps forward, clearing his throat as he addresses the group. His voice is steady, but softened by the gravity of the season. He speaks of the hardships faced this year, failed crops, frozen roads, scattered illnesses. Yet he also speaks of endurance of the many nights when neighbours shared bread fire, or even silence in the face of difficulty. His words resonate with the hush of the crowd, each listener carrying their own memories of survival. Competing readings in historical commentary complicate our understanding of how solemn or celebratory these year-end gatherings truly were. But here the tone feels intimate and earnest. As the group disperses slightly, some individuals remain behind to tie small pieces of cloth to the post where the charm hangs. Each cloth holds a faint trace of colour, barely visible in the dim light. The gesture feels symbolic, like a whispered promise to carry hope into the coming year. A tiny anecdote from a forgotten winter rhyme suggests that tying cloth to a post ensured that one's wishes would travel more easily into the new season. Whether or not the townsfolk know this rhyme, their actions carry a quiet sincerity. You walk past the crossroads and continue toward a rise overlooking the city. From here, the rooftops stretch across the snowy landscape in layered silhouettes. Chimneys release thin columns of smoke that drift upward before dissolving into the night. The sight feels both peaceful and fragile. A cluster of surviving letters makes it plausible that people often climbed small hills during midwinter to view the city and contemplate the unpredictable path ahead. Standing here, you understand why. The world looks still almost timeless, and the distance softens its hardships. You feel the cold settling through your boots, reminding you that winter remains far from over. The snow beneath you glistens with a subtle sparkle, catching the moonlight in delicate patterns. Footprints from earlier travellers cross your path, weaving together stories of people who walked this same ridge in search of reflection. You follow the trail for a short while, letting the landscape wrap around you. At the top of the rise, you find another small gathering. These figures stand quietly gazing toward the sky. One points upward, noting the brightness of a particular star. Findings from recent manuscript analysis indicate that star watching during Christmastide held layered meanings, blending spiritual reflection with simple appreciation for the sky unclouded by city smoke. You lift your gaze and see the same star, shimmering above, steady and calm. A woman beside you whispers a brief prayer. Her breath merges with the cold air, forming a faint cloud that dissolves quickly. Another person kneels in the snow, picking up a handful and letting it fall through their fingers in a slow cascade. Scholarly viewpoints branch in multiple directions around the idea that such gestures symbolized renewal or the shedding of burdens. Whether symbolic or habitual, the act feels deeply human. You stand among these quiet figures, each absorbed in their own thoughts. No one speaks loudly. Instead, the silence becomes a shared language, shaping a gentle communion between strangers. The snow muffles every sound, turning the hilltop into a sanctuary carved from winter itself. After a time, the group begins to disperse. They descend the hill one by one, returning to their homes, their fires, their waiting families. You remain a moment longer, letting the peaceful weight of the night settle around you. When you finally turn back toward the city, the path stretches ahead, like a pale ribbon. The lanterns below shimmer softly through the drifting snow. You walk with unhurried steps, carrying the quiet reflections of this hillside gathering as you approach the final turn of the winter story. You descend from the hill with slow, steady steps, letting the quiet of the gathering settle into your breath. The snow crunches under your boots in a soft, rhythmic pattern that blends with the stillness of the night. Ahead, the city stretches into a patchwork of dim lights and deeper shadows, each window carrying its own small story. As you near the lower streets again, the scent of wood smoke grows stronger, and the cold feels sharper, as if reminding you that the last nights of the year often ask for patience. Turning a corner, you find a small group of townsfolk gathered around a makeshift table outside a workshop. Their faces glow in the lantern light, and though they're tired, they wear expressions softened by the season. On the table rests a round loaf of dense bread and a pot of warm broth. Early fiscal rolls reveal subtle patterns showing how communities often shared modest food on the final nights of Christmastide, not as feasts, but as tokens of unity. The bowl is passed slowly between hands, each person taking a small sip before offering it to the next. A child sits close to the table, clutching a wool blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She watches the adults with curious eyes, her feet dangling just above the snow. A once commonplace superstition, tucked into hearthside stories, hints that children who stayed awake through the turning of the year would gain a measure of good fortune. The girl fights drowsiness with quiet determination, blinking slowly as the warm light flickers across her face. Beside her, an older man sharpens a small iron tool. His movements are deliberate, almost meditative. The tool catches the lantern's glow, flashing briefly, before returning to shadow. Commentary embedded in guild documents illustrates that craftsmen often used year-end gatherings to maintain tools, believing that beginning the new year with well-prepared equipment set the tone for productive months ahead. Watching him work now, you sense ritual woven into practicality. Another figure steps forward, carrying a small bundle wrapped in cloth. She opens it to reveal a handful of dried apples and a wedge of cheese. These are humble offerings, yet they carry significance beyond their size. An obscure margin note in a devotional book observes that sharing preserved food during the final nights of the season expressed both gratitude and hope that supplies would last until spring. The group murmurs appreciation as the food is distributed. A quiet conversation begins among two women near the workshop door. They speak of the year's difficulties, but they also speak of small triumphs, a repaired roof that held through storms, a late harvest that yielded more grain than expected, a child who recovered from illness. Interpretive tensions remain unresolved among specialists studying whether such winter reflections were common, but here they feel entirely natural, forming a gentle counterweight to the hardships endured. You step a little closer, drawn by the warmth of the shared fire. The flames flicker in steady waves, illuminating boots dusted with snow and cloaks patched repeatedly through the season. Someone tosses a small evergreen sprig into the fire, and the scent rises instantly, earthy and sharp. A tiny anecdote from a forgotten winter rhyme suggests that burning evergreen before the new year helped cleanse lingering misfortune. The group watches the sprig curl and vanish in the flames, their expressions thoughtful. One of the townsfolk begins humming a slow, familiar melody. Others join in, quietly forming a soft chorus that drifts across the snowy street. The tune carries a calm rhythm, neither celebratory nor mournful, but something in between. Divergent historical frameworks offer contrasting explanations for the role of simple communal songs during winter's end, yet the effect here is clear. The song knits people together, warming the cold space between them. You close your eyes briefly, letting the melody settle into you. The muffled crackle of the fire, the soft voices, the faint scent of broth and evergreen blend into a peaceful harmony. These sounds form the final notes of the season, not loud or grand, but steady, human, and enduring. When the song ends, people begin gathering their cloaks, preparing to leave for their homes. They exchange quiet farewells, promising to meet again when the sun rises on the new year. The lantern's glow softens as the group disperses, leaving only the faint shimmer of embers in the brazier. You stand alone for a moment, absorbing the stillness. The snow falls lightly, brushing your face with cold, delicate touches. The city feels hushed, as if holding its breath before stepping into another cycle of frost growth and life. You turn back toward the road, ready to return to the heart of London. The journey through winter has revealed its harshness, its beauty, its fragility, and its quiet strength. As you walk, the city seems to whisper around you, reminding you that even in the coldest months, warmth persists in shared moments, small rituals, and the steady resilience of people facing the long night together. And with that soft reminder, your footsteps carry you into the peaceful hush of the year's final hours. The night settles gently around you, now softer than before, as though the world has exhaled and released its tension into the quiet air. The snow beneath your feet becomes a muted cushion, each step carrying you deeper into calm. Lantern light fades into a warm haze behind you, leaving only the soft glow of winter skies above. Take a slow breath here. Let the coolness fill your lungs, then drift out again, steady and unhurried. The city grows distant, its sounds falling away until only silence remains. The kind of silence that feels welcoming, like a blanket drawn lightly across your shoulders. You feel the weight of the long journey loosening, melting into the stillness of this gentle winter night. Every story you have walked through now settles around you like fresh snow, quiet, even, and peaceful. Allow your thoughts to soften. Let the images fade into soft edges. The fires, the faces, the snowfall, the distant songs, all slowly dimming into a comfortable glow at the back of your mind. You are safe here, warm, held by the quiet rhythm of a night ready to offer rest. Let your breath slow, let your eyes grow heavy. Sleep comes easily now. End of script, sweet dreams.